this is Cindy Leach, your polymer clay tutor, and today's studio tip. I'm going to review the book Micro Macrame 25 Superfine Jewelry Projects by the author Jenny Townley. Now, I wasn't going to do another book review because I just did one last week, but I ended up making a project from this book that I want to give to my mom for Mother's Day, and the timing just works out that way if I want to show you this project. So, the book that I did last week was called Bead It, Iron It, Love It, and I did a polymer clay cane from it. And I just wanted to quickly mention, there were a few people that had, now the cane ended up to be about this big around. Some people were worried about it not reducing very well, and I just wanted to show you that I did reduce it, and it reduces right down to a super tiny size, and it still looks super cute. So I just wanted to mention that to you. Now, if you haven't seen that video, go check it out. It's a cute one. All right, so this book is also from the same publisher, Baron Publishing, and they sent me a few books to review. And I thought the best way to review a book was to do something in the book, do one of the projects. And so I did that. And I ended up making this bracelet, which I'll talk about in a second. But now I'll just show you, flip through the book a little bit so you get an idea of what it's like. It's nicely made. The photography is really beautiful in it, and it's set up pretty much like a typical craft book where you've got the table of contents. In the beginning here, they've got about the book, the author, about the book, a little bit of information. And then the first section is about the knots, the tools, and the techniques. Now this book, I forgot to mention, it says every technique explained for beginners and up. And so they've got some beginner, or they've got all these different things in here. So this is the knot directory. It's got your basic knots, which is really handy to have on hand because sometimes you don't remember the name of the knots or exactly how the knots work. But they've got the basic knots like lark's head knot, overhand knot, square knot, spiral knot, and the pictures are good. You can see how it's done. They've got full loop knot. Oh, I haven't done that one before. Double half hitch knot, the one I ended up using for this bracelet. Left and right. You do it differently for each. And then that's about it for the knots. And then they go into the basic tools. One of the tools that they suggest is using one of these macrame boards, and I actually happen to have one. I'll show you what it looks like. I actually picked mine up a while ago when I was at Shipwreck Beads. We did a video on Shipwreck Beads a while ago, and that's where I got this macrame board. You don't have to have a board like this to do it. You can just do it on a clipboard, but the nice thing about these boards, first of all, they're not that expensive. And they are a foam that you can, it has these little slots and things in it, and your cords kind of go, I'll just quickly show you at the top. You can pull the cords into the top here, and then you can knot away, and then you can use a pin to pin your design and that kind of thing. It's really nice. I've macrameed by tying onto a doorknob before, and this is just really nice. It's easy to work with. So they mention that in the book. And then it goes into like choosing cords, buying beads, you know, the typical stuff you'd find in a craft book. They have a few pictures of different things. Then they go into the projects. Now, this book has it set up where they have beginner projects. They're all in one section. And they're here like that. You can see pretty simple designs, basic stuff. I do like the designs that they have. They're really modern and nice looking projects. And then they have an intermediate section. I would consider myself an intermediate in the micro macrame level. I've done a fair amount of just sort of knotting as a kid, and then a little bit as an adult, but not too much. So I would be an intermediate level. So here are the intermediate level projects in here, and They're nicely laid out. This is the one I actually ended up doing, which I'll talk about again in 1 second. So then we go through, there's lots of earrings, necklaces, that kind of thing. Then they go into more advanced projects. Further in, are we there yet? Yeah, we are. So lots of knots with beads and you know, different patterns and things like that. So it's fairly nicely laid out, and there's some good pictures in it. Now, when I went to go do the project, this is the one that I chose. I ended up having to change the design a bit, partly because of the focal bead that I chose. But as I started getting into this project, I realized that there was a little bit of missing information. And this is a real typical thing that you're going to find in almost all craft books these days, is that when you actually go to do the project, they can't show you enough photographs. And so they just leave some stuff out, and it makes it hard. Now, for me, being intermediate, and also having a fair amount of jewelry skills, I could read between the lines and I could just figure it out. So it worked out to be a good book for me. But I don't think it's really that suited for a total beginner, just because of a couple of things. For example, this whole bracelet here, they don't actually show you how this focal bead is attached. In the instructions, they show you the beginning part of the pattern, and then they say to go to 3.5 inches and then add your focal and then continue your pattern for 3.5 more inches. But the problem is a couple of things. First of all, this focal bead, which you learn if you read well enough, is actually a button, and it has a shank on the back. And the 8 cords end up having to go through the shank through the back. Now, I can picture that because I've done a lot of this kind of thing, but a beginner may not have any idea what they're talking about. So showing the back of that button would have been really nice to see. Also, trying to get those knots up into the next section would have been kind of tricky. You would have to keep pulling the focal out of the way to try to get those knots in nicely at the back. Also, they don't tell you how to finish it. They tell you, but they don't show you. So it says here at the end, to finish, place the ends of the cord in a ribbon clamp and then attach a jump ring and a lobster clasp. They show kind of in the book lots of places where they use these ribbon clamps, but they don't show you anywhere in the book how to actually use those or how to finish off the cords. So that was another issue. But I will just explain to you what I did and how I went about it and all that. So I changed the design a little bit. On their pattern, they had the design go like this. Here, I'll unhook this. They started off with the design. They went for 3.5 inches, had their focal button there, and then continued on. Then they added the ribbon clasp at the end here, and then had a hook with a lobster hook that you would hook on to this end here, which is a decent design. I could do that. But when I dug around looking for a focal bead to use, I found this cabochon I had made quite some time ago by using the cabezel mold. I have a video on that as well if you want to check that out. But it was the colors and the shape of it that I thought suited the knotting I had done so far. So I'd gotten to the 3.5 inches and started digging around for a focal bead. The color just seemed to me to go perfectly for this bracelet. So then I had to try to figure out how in the heck I was going to add it. Now, I was thinking I might add a screw eye at the back and use that kind of like a shank and then slide it on. But I kept looking at the design and I felt like if I could hide all the findings behind the focal bead, it would end up being a nicer looking bracelet in the end. So then I had to try to figure out how I was going to do all of that. What ended up what I ended up figuring out was I used this is like a hook and eye clasp that you would use in sewing. I just happened to have one in a bunch of old sewing stuff, and it had 3 holes in it. So I bent this one hole up just a little bit away from the surface, added a loop, and added it to my ribbon clamp. I'll talk about how I added the ribbon clamp in a sec. But then I had to figure out how to attach this piece to here. And originally I thought, well, maybe some little tiny screws, but all the screws I found that were the right length had too big of heads on them, and they were a problem. So I ended up going with some larger kind of head finishing nails, which I cut shorter. And then I used some hypo cement glue behind this hook here. Also drilled a couple of little holes in those 2 holes here. So I used my little hand drill, drilled some little pilot holes, then took the finishing nails, put some glue on them as well, and nailed them in. So it's very solid. It's been glued and nailed to this piece, and it is functioning really well. I was quite pleased with how that ended up working out. And it was just a matter of fiddling around and trying to figure that out. So that's what I ended up doing. Now, for ribbon clamps, if you have no idea how to add that to a piece like this, and if you've read the book, you would have no idea. This is how what they are. Okay, so you get these clamp closures or ribbon clamps. I got a little pack of several different sizes at Michael's. Now these are the premium metal ones, so they have they use real brass, so they're a little higher quality and they're going to be stronger. But here's what they look like out of the package, and they kind of have like these little tiny teeth on there. I don't know if Doug's going to be able to pick up on that, but those clamp down on your work. So let's just push this out of the way and pretend that that hook isn't there. You would take the little threads that are on your end here, and you make sure the knots are all tied tight, and you trim them fairly short. Then you have to melt them, because this is a kind of cording that melts if you use a lighter. So I melted the ends down with the lighter and got them all so that they wouldn't fray or come unraveled or anything. Then I put my clamp over the pieces, all the little ribbon ends, made sure they were all tucked in, and then I used a pair of flat nose or chain nose pliers to just crush it down and pinch that whole piece of all the cording inside that clamp. Then you can just add a jump ring there, and you're good to go. But some cords don't melt. You have to kind of test that ahead of time. You may need to glue them or tape them or do something like that to get them so that they all sit in there nice and tight. And you want to give it a good tug to make sure that it's on there. Now, as far as the cording that I used, I also got that at Shipwreck Beads because I was there and they have all that kind of stuff. I used a Asian knotting cord. It comes in all kinds of different sizes, and this happens to be 1 millimeter in length. And this is done by a company called Dazzle It, and these are called Lovely Knots. It's beautiful for that kind of thing. I followed the instructions in the book, and this is the extra that I had left over. It was a little bit overkill in my opinion, but you're better off having a little bit extra than coming up too short when it comes with knotting. So overall, this is a good book if you are an intermediate, in my opinion. But you have to know a little bit so that you can fill in those little blanks that are there. And that's partly why I love video tutorials so much, is that they don't have those blanks in there, as long as you're not skipping over or doing, voiceovers or something. But if you do the technique in every step, then you're not going to miss anything like what happens in a book. But overall, I think the designs are really great. It's a good reference book. I'll probably do a few more projects from here. And I did very much enjoy making this bracelet, and I hope my mom loves it for Mother's Day. So I hope that was helpful for you. And if it was, do let us know if you liked this video. And if you've got a book you'd like me to review, a product you'd like me to test, a technique you don't know anything about that you'd like to learn more about, make sure to leave those suggestions in the comment section below. And don't forget, we have tons and tons of videos on all kinds of topics that you can learn more about polymer clay from. All right, so we'll see you next time, and bye for now.